At 02:17 hours, the world's most secure server went dark. A single encrypted file, Cipher Protocol 99, vanished without a trace. A server that officially never existed was breached, its silence broken by an alarm buried since the Cold War. For 50 years, no one had heard it, until tonight, and the man who heard it wasn't sitting in Washington, or Langley, or the Pentagon. He was sweeping brass casings at Fort Ironvale to the recruits. He was just Elias Kane, the bent old janitor with a broom in one hand and a dustpan in the other. They saw the creases, the tremor, the stoop, a relic, something forgotten. What they didn't see was the ghost who had been waiting. Careful there. Grandpa, one private muttered with a grin as he jogged past. Don't trip on the brass. Old man, you missed a spot by locker 5, barked a corporal with a clipboard, not even looking up from his checklist. Kane only smiled faintly, his pale eyes unreadable, and shuffled over to correct their mistake. He rarely spoke. He rarely needed to. His work was its own language, one that only a handful of men alive could still read. When he cleaned an M4 Carbine, it wasn't routine. His gnarled hands moved like instruments, tracing along the firing pin with the precision of a surgeon. He would feel for hairline fractures invisible to the naked eye, catch the subtle warp in a barrel that could send a 5.56 Miato round drifting inches off target at 300 meters. What looked like slow, fragile motions to the recruits were in fact a study in ruthless economy. No wasted movement, no hesitation. Every pass of the cloth, every check of the chamber was sharpened by decades of experience. The recruits thought he was lost in nostalgia, remembering some long-gone war. He wasn't. His pale gaze on the range was clinical, dissecting their flaws like data points in a sniper's logbook. He catalogued the too-wide stance of one soldier that would sap his endurance, the split-second flinch of another just before the trigger break. Every weakness went into a mental archive that no training manual could capture. They saw a harmless janitor, in truth. Elias Kane was running the most precise inspection Fort Ironvale had seen in a generation. The quietest man on base was also the most dangerous. He wasn't waiting for orders. He was waiting for a sign. And now that the alarm had been triggered, Kane knew his time in the shadows was nearly over. Because ghosts don't sweep floors forever. You're watching Stories Unseen. Tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more hidden military stories. Master Sergeant Holt had spent 3 decades in the military, and it showed. His face looked carved from stone, his stare cold as steel. He'd seen prodigies rise and fall, frauds bluff and get burned, even men who looked unstoppable crack under pressure. Nothing surprised him anymore, or so he thought. On the rifle range at Fort Ironvale, Holt's eyes weren't on the recruits fumbling with their M4 carbines. His gaze slid past the shouting drill instructors, past the brass raining on the dirt. It landed on the old janitor bending to pick up casings. It wasn't the creak of brittle bones. Kane's crouch was fluid, balanced. His weight perfectly centered a paratrooper's crouch, the kind drilled into men who jumped into combat zones where one wrong angle meant a broken ankle or a dead man. Holt's brow furrowed. Strange, nearby. A young recruit botched a magazine change. The drill sergeant tore into him with a hail of profanity, but Holt's ears picked something else so soft it nearly vanished in the Georgia wind. Kane's rasp, almost a whisper, slow as smooth, smooth as fast. The words froze Holt's blood. Common enough in the Special Forces community. Sure, but the rhythm, the cadence, belonged to a time before these recruits were even born. It was the ghost of Delta Force and CIA Black Ops training doctrines long buried. Holt's head snapped toward Kane. His seasoned eyes scanned details most men would never notice. That's when he saw it, the battered wristwatch on Kane's arm, not worn outside like everyone else, but strapped to the inside of the wrist, a soldier's trick to kill the glare of sunlight, to keep a sniper scope from catching the glint. But this wasn't just habit, it was a signature. Only one unit had ever made it standard, a unit that didn't officially exist anymore. A name whispered only in classified backroom Specter 9. Cold dread knifed through Holt's chest, mixing with awe. Could it be, that night? The armory was silent. Save for the rhythmic slide of a cleaning rod through steel, the smell of CLP oil hung thick in the air. Elias Kane sat on a low stool, hunched over an M4 Carbine, cloth in hand, to anyone else. He looked like a fragile old man, lost in the repetition of maintenance. But Holt wasn't fooled anymore. He stepped in, his boots somehow soundless on the concrete. He stood there for a long time, just watching the old man work. The silence stretched, heavy, finally. Holt's voice cut through. Low and tight, that phrase you used on the range. And the watch? I've only ever seen one kind of man wear his kit like that. Specter 9, for the first time. Kane's hands paused, just a fraction of a second, like a skipped heartbeat. Then he resumed wiping the receiver. Calm, deliberate, his eyes never lifted. But Holt felt it a shift in the air. The harmless mask was slipping, and deep down, he knew if Elias Kane truly was Specter 9, then the most dangerous man on this base wasn't holding command. He was sitting right here, cleaning rifles in silence. I thought they were all gone. The words from Holt hung heavy in the dim armory, swallowed by the hum of fluorescent lights, for the first time. Elias Kane's hands paused over the open M4 Carbine receiver. Just a fraction of a second, a skipped heartbeat in the rhythm of a man who had built his entire life on rhythm. Then he resumed. But the motion was different now. No longer the careful, shaky polish of a harmless old janitor. His fingers moved with a speed that didn't belong to age. The bolt carrier group slid back into place, the trigger assembly locked down with a practiced snap. The charging handle clicked forward. Kane's hands blurred, the pieces of the weapon flowing together as if the rifle wanted to be whole in his grasp. He didn't need to look. He rebuilt the heart of the weapon by touch alone, muscle memory honed in places where a mistake meant death. When his eyes finally lifted to Holt, the transformation was complete. The cloudy, vacant gaze was gone. What stared back at the battle-hardened Master Sergeant was sharp, merciless, like chipped ice. In that instant, Holt, a man who had faced warlords and insurgents without flinching, felt like a raw recruit again. Kane's hand slid across the scarred workbench. A single round gleamed beneath the harsh lights of 50 BMG cartridge, its brass polished, its weight undeniable. With one finger, Kane pushed it toward Holt, the tap echoing like a gavel. Some things get left behind. Sergeant, Kane rasped. His voice was no longer frail. It carried the authority of command. Low and final. Make sure you're not one of them. It wasn't a threat. It was a command. Holt felt something primal twist in his gut, a knot of fear he hadn't known in decades. He gave a sharp nod, his face pale under the sterile lights. In that moment, he understood the most dangerous man on Fort Ironvale wasn't wearing rank on his sleeve. He was wearing overalls and holding a broom when no one was looking. Holt left the armory, a changed man. The next morning, he was seen pressed against a cinder-block wall in a secure corridor, murmuring urgently into a scrambled phone line. His voice carried a frantic edge that his peers had never heard. An hour later, he was in the office of Colonel Ramirez, the base commander. Ramirez was young, ambitious, a politician in combat boots who saw his command at Fort Ironvale as nothing more than a stepping stone to the Pentagon. He smirked as Holt laid out his concerns. "It's a volunteer janitor." "Holt," Ramirez scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. "An old-timer. Probably tells stories at the VFW. But let's not lose our minds." Holt leaned in, his knuckles whitening against the polished desk. He whispered a few sentences, words too quiet for the aide outside to catch. The colonel's smirk vanished. Color drained from his face until it looked waxy, corpse-like. He stared at Holt as if the sergeant had just told him the sky was falling. The ripple effect was immediate. By afternoon, the atmosphere on the base shifted in ways the recruits couldn't explain. When Kane shuffled past the command building with his broom and a dustpan, Colonel Ramirez, normally brash and full of swagger, flattened himself against the wall, eyes wide, as if making way for a general. A young captain who had once barked at Kane to hurry with the trash cans now jogged ahead to hold open the mess hall door. "After you, sir. Please," he stammered. The recruits were bewildered. Nothing made sense anymore. Why were men who feared nothing suddenly treating the janitor like a ghost who might tear the sky open? They whispered among themselves, searching for answers. But whispers weren't enough. Because the truth about Elias Kane was about to break the base wide open. The tension on Fort Ironvale was no longer background noise, it was the air itself. Drill instructors who once barked without fear now snapped to rigid attention when Elias Kane walked by, only relaxing into an awkward slump after he was gone. Recruits whispered wild theories. Was he a billionaire playing janitor for fun, a senator's father, a forgotten war hero? None of their guesses came close. Through it all, Kane never changed. He swept brass casings from the range. He polished the brass fixtures on the doors. He wiped down rifles in the armory. His expression remained placid, almost bored, like a man who had nothing left to prove. But that calm only amplified the unease. It was like watching a lion sleep, knowing its claws could unsheathe at any second. The pressure finally cracked in the officer's mess. Lieutenant Carter Briggs, a West Point graduate with ambition carved into his jawline, slammed his tray down across from Master Sergeant Holt. His voice carried sharp enough to silence the room. "This base is paralyzed over a janitor." Briggs snapped. "It's absurd. Command is frozen." "What did you tell the colonel?" Holt looked up slowly. His eyes were heavy. Aged a decade in just 2 days. He gestured for Briggs to sit, lowering his voice. "Quiet. Son, you're making a fool of yourself." "I want the truth," Briggs insisted. Though he sank into his seat, Holt sighed, the sound of a man exhausted from guarding a burden too heavy. "You see a janitor. That's all your eyes let you see. But you're blind. That watch on the inside of his wrist, that's not a quirk. That's the uniform of a unit that never officially existed." Briggs scoffed. "A ghost story. They called them Specter 9. Holt growled. "Troubleshooters. Men sent alone to dismantle networks, to stop wars before they started. The program was buried, officially wiped out in Southeast Asia. Mid-70s. But the legend said one survived. The one who wrote the doctrine your professors at West Point still can't fully grasp." Holt leaned closer, his whisper like a knife. "His name is Elias Kane, Watchman One." Briggs's smirk faltered. He didn't believe it couldn't, but the seed of doubt lodged itself like a splinter. The proof came the next day. The rhythmic thump of rotor blades rolled over the base. Not a training flight. This was heavier, more deliberate. An MH-60 Black Hawk roared in, not toward the VIP pad, but directly onto the grass beside Rifle Range 7, blasting dust and dry earth into a choking storm. The entire base seemed to hold its breath. Out stepped General Stratton, 4 stars glinting on his collar. Commander of U.S. Special Operations Command. He ignored Colonel Ramirez's frantic salute, walked straight past the base commander as if he were furniture, and stopped on the firing line. Kane stood there, broom in hand, watching recruits stumble through drills. Some of the younger soldiers smirked. "Looks like the old man's in trouble now," one whispered. But Stratton didn't yell. He didn't reprimand. He stopped in front of the stooped janitor and spoke in a tone of profound respect that carried across the stunned silence. "Watchman One, we received your signal." Every smirk vanished. Jaws slackened. Eyes widened. The base had just witnessed a tectonic shift in reality. Stratton turned to the assembled ranks, his voice booming like artillery. "For those of you confused, let me make it clear. This man, Mr. Kane, his record is sealed above my own clearance. He is credited with preventing 4 wars, dismantling 3 cartels, and stopping a nuclear plot no team could touch. He designed infiltration tactics still taught to Navy SEALs and Army Rangers today." The ground itself seemed to tilt. Lieutenant Briggs looked as if lightning had struck him where he stood. Kane didn't move. He let Stratton's words hang in the air, the weight of truth pressing down on every man present. But when he finally straightened, the stoop vanished. His eyes swept the field, hard and cold, and then he spoke for the first time in front of them all. "I didn't call you here for history. General, I called you for Cassandra." The name cut through the silence like a blade. No one knew what it meant, but they all felt its gravity. And with that, Fort Ironvale's quiet janitor had just declared war on the present. General Stratton's voice still echoed when silence blanketed the range. The power dynamic at Fort Ironvale wasn't just broken, it had been obliterated. Kane was no longer the janitor. He was Watchman One, and every man on the field felt it in his bones. Stratton's gaze locked on him. "Your signal, the Cipher Protocol 99. It hasn't been active in my lifetime. Why now?" "Kane, what do you need?" The frail shuffle was gone. Elias Kane stood tall, his back iron, his voice a sharpened blade. "I'm not here because of what happened decades ago. General, I'm here because of what happened last Tuesday at Red Mesa. They think they stole a data file code named Cassandra. They're wrong." He let the words hang, eyes sweeping across the stunned officers. "Cassandra isn't a file. She's a person, a cryptographer. My granddaughter. She left me a message inside the breach." A ripple of shock surged through the ranks. Stratton's jaw tightened. What message? Kane reached into his overalls, producing a small data chip. Archaic but lethal. A list. Names. The ones who took her aren't hiding in some foreign desert. They're here. This base isn't just compromised, it's a cage. The words hadn't even finished when movement shattered the stillness. Lieutenant Carter Briggs lunged, his Sig Sauer P-226 Navy flashing into his grip. But he didn't aim at Kane. He jammed the pistol against Stratton's temple, yanking the 4-star general close as a shield. "He's right," Briggs hissed, fanatic fire burning in his eyes. "The lock is here, and you just lost the key." The ranger's digital systems flickered and died. A thunderous explosion tore from the ammunition depot, a black plume clawing at the sky. It wasn't meant to slaughter, it was meant to distract, to scatter, to blind. And it worked. Chaos detonated across the base. Soldiers scrambled, shouts cracking the air. In the maelstrom, Kane was steady as stone, his voice sliced through the storm. "Halt perimeter, General," down with a speed that defied his age. He flipped a heavy equipment table for cover. From a hidden pocket, he drew a suppressed sidearm and slid an earpiece into place. His rasp carried an authority that no one dared question. Watchman One active. Protocol Chimera in effect. "All friendlies rally to me." He moved like lightning, snatching an M4 Carbine from a frozen recruit. He barked without hesitation. Your stance is too wide. Fix it. Even under fire, the instinct to teach, to sharpen, was reflex. Briggs and 2 traitors poured suppressive fire from behind concrete. Kane dropped to one knee. The rifle fused to him. He inhaled once. Slow. Slow is smooth. Smooth is fast. The loyal soldiers froze. Stratton's head was still pinned under Briggs's gun. No one dared risk a shot. But Kane didn't hesitate. His eyes calculated angles the way a sniper solves equations. This wasn't luck. It was the legendary ricochet shot, the one that had written his name into Specter 9's classified doctrine. He fired. The 5.56mm round streaked downrange, slammed into the steel arm of a target stand at 100 meters, and ricocheted in a screaming arc. It tore back across the range, smashing into Briggs' firing hand, shattering bone and steel. The pistol fell. Briggs howled in pain. The other traitors faltered, stunned by the impossible. Holt and the Loyalists surged, cutting them down in seconds. The firefight ended as abruptly as it began. Kane strode through the smoke, seized Briggs by the collar, and yanked him upright. The depot was a diversion. He growled, "Where is she?" Terror widened Briggs' eyes. He flicked them toward a maintenance hatch near the range's edge. Under tunnels. Ravens Field. North Airstrip. Kane's jaw hardened. He turned to Holt. "They're moving her now. We cut them off in the tunnels. Together." Kane and Holt led a strike team into the Black Ridge tunnels, a labyrinth only Kane remembered in the echoing dark. He dismantled the traitors with surgical precision. Minutes later, they emerged into daylight. Kane's arm wrapped around a shaken but unharmed Nora Kane. The base was secure. General Stratton approached, voice low with reverence. "Elias, the nation owes you a debt it can never repay." Kane didn't look at the captured traitors or the grateful soldiers. His eyes stayed on the horizon, distant and cold. This was just one cell. General. The network is still out there, and the list she gave me is very long. The janitor was gone. The watchman had returned.